Good afternoon and welcome to the Tuesday, June 1st, 2021 meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee. First order of business is to identify potential conflicts of interest. You've seen the packet. Is there anything in there that you think might be a conflict?
No.
Seeing none, we'll move on to citizen comments. Citizen comments. We have no citizen comments. We'll move on to the consent agenda, which consists only of minutes of May 18, 2021 meeting and the bills and the payroll. What's your wishes?
Motion.
Motion by Paschal, second by Wetzel to approve. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? So
Aye.
carried. Okay, let's see. Item 6, request to recommend council approval to submit job descriptions for a new position of GIS specialist to the city's compensation consultant for possible inclusion in proposed 2022 budget. Mr. Connect.
Excuse me. Thank you. Our GIS program, Geographic Information Systems, has been in operation for almost 20 years already. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but during that time, we've managed with just one FTE, and we've been able to grow the system as well as manage the data. In 2018, we added a GIS intern that has helped with some special projects and so forth, as well as some data collection. But we're at a point where we're seeing the demand for GIS essentially out of every department, going beyond what our staffing capacity is to maintain the system. We're finding that it's being used not only for mapping, but and your traditional data collection, but other departments like the fire department is using it for some pre-planning in their emergency, fire prevention planning. And we're seeing it in numerous other departments, as David has pointed out in the memo here. As well as we're supporting outside organizations to some degree with special events and some of the things that are planned citywide. And we've done our best to manage with just that one full-time position, but we think it's time to consider an additional position with our 2022 budget. There's a whole list of tasks that are identified in the memo here, and I won't go through all those, but if you have questions on anything there, we could certainly try to answer those. What we're asking for tonight is just to approve the job description that was included in your packet. We'd like to send this on to McGrath to get it properly placed in our pay scale, so then we can effectively cost out this position and then propose it in the budget. So we're not asking for approval of the position tonight. We would also be looking at shared funding opportunities with this position, as wastewater is a big user of GIS services. We think there's an opportunity for wastewater to increase their contribution toward the GIS program. And we'll look for other opportunities as the budget process evolves. As I mentioned in the memo, this is an entry-level position looking for 0 to 2 years experience. Not much different probably than our interns, but trying to get someone in the position full-time to have some consistency and kind of build some momentum with this position. It would be a combination of in the office as well as out in the field, collecting data and so forth, making maps, and just providing support for staff in multiple areas. So with that, I'd like to answer any questions, but ask for your approval of the GIS specialist job description and direct staff to send that job description to McGrath for placement on the city wage scale.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Handler?
Move to approve.
Motion by Handler, second by Wetzel to approve. Discussion? I assume you've done some advanced planning on this, Dan, and would you be planning on still bringing that person on board this year?
Well, no, it would be part of the 2022 budget request, so we wouldn't fill a position until after January 1, assuming it's approved.
So you'd be looking for a new position in that, and it reports to the engineering department, or?
Right, GIS reports up through the city engineer, so this would be a staff position in the engineering department, correct?
Okay, Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. You mentioned about possible job sharing with wastewater. How does Mr. Warp feel about that?
He's on board. He recognizes that they use, they're a big user of GIS, and they'd like to be doing more with GIS, and so They need staff to maintain their data, so he supports participating in the cost of this position.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
Next up is the annual TID financial update? No, what, did I miss something?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Request to recommend council approval for a 1% adjustment to the city's wage scale for all non-represented staff effective 7/1/21. And to authorize the study team to review and make recommendations regarding compression. And that's up by Steve. Steve, where you at? Oh, there you are. You're on.
I'm here. I apologize. I would normally be in the room with you all tonight. However, I injured myself a little bit doing some landscaping this weekend, so I did some of my work today at home using an ice pack as I worked at times. So anyway, thank you for the time here. I'm not going to do a lot of rehashing of some of the discussion from the last two council meetings. Jen did a great presentation on May 11th. I followed up on May 25th. We had some Q&A about some questions council raised on our current compensation plan, which was adopted in 2018 after a study with McGrath of Northern Illinois. And I don't think all the questions maybe have been answered, but I think we made some good headway, and it seemed like council had a pretty good understanding of our current plan. The two main issues that seemed to survive those meetings are as follows. Number one, are we starting to fall behind on our implementation and keeping up on that pay plan adopted in 2018? And do we have a problem with compression between management and other staff in particularly the police and fire departments that's going to create us some more problem going down the road? On the first one, as I outlined on May 25th, with respect to whether we're falling behind the wage scale, in the last couple of years, in 19 and 20, we've given a 2% scale adjustment, 2% in 2019 and 0 last year, which I'll touch on in a minute. And during that time, the consumer price index has been 3.7%. For this year, we don't have one in place, an expected wage increase, and the CPI is rising. You probably are paying attention to the news. Inflation is jumping up on us here quite a bit in the first 4 months of 2021. So if you think back to 2020, when a 1% wage scale was put in the approved budget, the intent is to try and keep moving forward on that part to adjust the pay ranges in addition to the steps that employees walk through in their scales. We ran, unfortunately, into COVID-19. And if you recall, back in May of 2020, the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee had a discussion where, at that time, I think it was identified that our citizens, our businesses were hurting. Some people were experiencing job losses and furloughs, and it was questioned whether that was a good time to be doing an increase. Also, there were concerns about our own finances here at City Hall as we still work through some of the fallout from the TIF transfers and our structural budget deficit of the past couple of years. So the committee voted not to do an increase at that time. However, in these recent conversations we've had with the council, it appears that there's a growing sense among elected officials that I think staff has that we appear to be drifting from keeping up on the scales, and we may find ourselves in 2023 or somewhere around there talking about doing another pay study with a consultant, which, as you know, costs a lot of money, and you don't want to do that very often, certainly not every 5 years if you can help it, because then you're paying a consultant money that you could be paying your own employees. So I'd like to bring us back to where we were, back to the 2020 approved budget, and look to get the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee and Council to approve a 1% across the board for non-represented employees increase in our wage scales. I think this would be a good honoring to where we wanted to be last year, but found ourselves in dire straits. But as you know, we've kind of gotten through that. The council did a good job in the 2021 budget process. We certainly had a tax rate increase that has allowed us to be really where we need to be where we should have been, I think. And we've made some strides in terms of our structural budget situation. This would be a good statement to our employees that we put them very front and center. They do great work here. They are our product. They are our service. What they do is what we're about, and we want to respect that. So the finance department has cost out the amount of money this would be for the balance of 2021. it would be about $75,000, of which about 60,000, 80% of that would be attributable to the general fund. The rest would be charged to other enterprise funds such as wastewater or EMS or whatever. So 60,000 would be the budget impact or the financial impact on the general fund. Now, again, this money isn't budgeted, so we're not turning any approved budget amount. It would have to be, taken from general fund balance. But I think this would go a long way toward, getting ourselves back on track with respect to keeping up on the salaries, which were determined to be, in many cases, a little bit lower than they should have been when that study was done. With respect to the compression, I'm recommending that we get a team together of a handful of people, maybe a couple of elected officials, a couple of staff people, Jen, and take a look at that situation, take a look at how it's evolved and what options we have to try and minimize that and try and adjust to that. Of course, we have unions in both police and fire, which makes it a little more difficult because their contracts dictate the pay that they get. That pay is not set in the same budget discussions that other employees are, but there may be some things we can do to try and mitigate that. We certainly want people aspiring to management positions in those departments. We don't want them saying no to taking leadership roles because they can make as much money or nearly as much money just being firefighters or police officers and not taking what a lot of people would consider to be headaches that come with those management positions. So those would be my two recommendations for you tonight. If you remember, Councilmember Fisher had asked that this be discussed and brought back to a council meeting this month. My recommendations would be that we implement a 1% across the board wage scale adjustment effective July 1 of this year, and that we get a team together of people. It doesn't have to be a big formal thing, but to at least take a look at the compression issue.
Thank you. What's your wishes? Mr. Handler?
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I would make a motion to approve the July 1, 21 1% increase.
I'll second that.
Motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. Couple of questions. We had a pretty significant tax increase, obviously, at the end of last year, but just for clarification, that was for our debt service. That was not for operating expenses. That's correct.
Correct.
And it's also my understanding that we actually lowered the operating expenses of the city for this current year's budget compared to the previous year's budget.
Correct, yep.
How does this impact that lowered operating expense?
Sure, it's by the dollar amount that Steve mentioned. So what we ended up at the end of the 2021 budget is our debt service is fully funded. We put all the new levy in there. We reduced our general fund expenses overall by some amount, less than 1%, but still a net decrease. We did end the budget period with a deficit in general fund of still $700,000. So our goal for the 2022 budget is a deficit of $350,000. So we still want to hit that goal, and this increase, as Steve mentioned, we're estimating at about $60,000 for this year. Then, of course, that adds on to the 2022 budget.
Okay, and where are we at budget-wise this year, year-to-date?
To be determined. We're still in the middle of a conversion, so we are still running some reports. We don't have great analyticals. I assume, from what I've seen, that we're close to or on budget.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question here. I'm sorry, were you done, Mr. Fed? Yes. Okay. Instead of taking this out of fund balance, could we take it out of, do we have the money in the contingency fund?
Let's see, I would have to look. We don't budget nearly as much as we used to in the contingency fund.
A couple of $100,000, I think.
No, we dropped it a couple of years ago during the budget cycle. We dropped it way down to, I want to say, $35,000 or $45,000. We didn't use any in 2020 actual, and I'm not aware that we've used any in 2021, but I think the budgeted amount in 21 is about $45,000.
Okay.
And if I can add to that for a second, Ed, it's two-part why we dropped it. It sounds kind of scary in a $22.5 million budget to have a contingency fund of $40,000. It almost sounds irresponsible. So we did that for two reasons over the last couple of years. One is because we've had to do that just to get through, just to make the budget work, because we're cutting everything in sight. But also because as Ron hinted, in looking back, a lot of the years I've been here in my 10 years with the city, we really haven't used anywhere near the $125,000 that we've often budgeted for contingency. In fact, sometimes it's been, little or nothing. So it's not like we're expecting to see a deficit in that by spending more in contingency or trying to spend more in contingency than we budget. It's generally been pretty low.
So the one final question then, Ron, you said we were looking for what, about $350,000 deficit this year?
Correct. If you go back,
And this adds another 60,000 to it.
correct. And if you
So
recall,
410,000.
right, that's the goal. And kind of what during these long discussions about our budget, we've said, it's really a three-step process. Step one is we need to clean up our debt service, which we did last year. And then in the second year, we want to cut our deficit in half from 700 to 350. And then the third year, get back to even. So this would be an additional $60,000 in the 2022 budget. If, I assume that's what you're asking about, that we'd have to
They would have to fund.
fund.
Mr. Handler,
Ron, do you feel comfortable with this 1% raise?
That's really a council decision. I think,
No, I mean, from a financial standpoint.
if it's $60,000 on the $22 million budget, and I think what Steve and I think some of the other councilmen are representing it as, a show of goodwill that we're committed to the compensation plan. I don't think it's in the grand scheme of things, it's material to our our financial health.
Thank you.
Mr. Paschal.
I just want to say, I think I've been on record as being supportive of following the compensation plan as closely as possible. I understand that there have been situations where we haven't necessarily done that, but in the last month or so, when I've had more interactions with the staff and the employees here, I can tell you that they are all doing an excellent job that I have seen. And it's not that I would never say that they don't deserve a raise, because I think they do deserve to be fairly compensated. And for that reason, I'm going to support this.
Thank you. Mr. Wetzel?
I also think that this is important. I realize what we did last year and why we did what we did last year in the middle of the pandemic. And I think Mr. Barg mentioned that about a lot of places being closed, layoffs, furloughs, those types of things, and our city staff didn't have to suffer through that, which was very nice for our city staff. But I think a raise last year would have sent a strange message. On the flip side of that, it's not that we're out of everything at this point, but we're definitely seeing, I think, a change in business, if you will. And I think that this is an important message to send, that we do value the staff, and that this is the least we can do for them at this point, I believe.
Any further discussion? Are you ready to vote? If so, if you're ready for the question, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. What?
I'll make a motion that we authorize a study team to review and make recommendations regarding compression in the compensation plan.
Yeah, who do you want to put that group together?
Mr. Barg?
Okay.
Yeah,
Steve?
yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get into that. Yeah, I apologize. I didn't get into that. My thought was, I'm not sure if I said this in my opening comments, but would be maybe a couple of elected officials and a couple of staff people, and including Jen, maybe myself, I don't know. But if there's favorability to that, if there's a motion to that effect, we don't necessarily, if that sounds like conceptually a good group, I can feel out people on the side and see who'd like to take part in that. We don't expect that to be a long process, but that's what I have in mind.
Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Paschal?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Wetzel?
Second.
Second. Okay, so.
You moved,
So
right?
I think Steve just said we didn't actually need the motion, though. Is that right? Is that correct, Steve?
Well, I guess, yeah, what I meant was you didn't need to get specific about exactly who was on and, right now, but
Okay. So you
You
must-
could make a motion of support for the idea, or you could just direct me to work with Jen on pulling it together. Either way.
Okay, so we'll let the motion and second stand. And Deb, would you read back what it comes out to, please?
The motion would be to authorize a study team to review and make recommendations on the compression issues.
Thank you. We got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. That passes. So, Steve, I'll be in touch with you. Thank you. Okay.
Sounds good, Ed.
Next. Let's see. Okay, Ron, now I think you're up, I think.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So this is, in your packet, you've got kind of a lengthy deck of slides talking about the TIDs. I'm just going to go over kind of each TID, where it's at and what we see, and kind of open it up for questions. Something we want to do annually. In general, our TIDs are doing extremely well. You know, most of them are at the maturity stage where their increment exceeds their debt, and we're just looking at the date to close them. And then the three newer ones are just have light debt and the options for more projects. So, and I think in the packet, there's a map of each one. So TID 2 is the Purdy building. We have been using it as a donor for several years, donating to TID 7 primarily. We filed the paperwork and the council approved that we close this TID at the end of 2021. So all we have left on this one is that the CLA will have to do a closeout audit of the TID, and we'll move it on. So that was about $115,000 in increment a year, and we'll return that to the tax roll. TID 4 is the downtown redevelopment district. Kind of this area, City Hall Plaza that we had sold went back on the tax roll. It's got a fair amount of debt, but it's still cash flowing pretty well. What Josh and I do with these, we call it a static forecast. We just look at a real conservative estimate of if there's no tax increases and there's no new growth, when could we close it out? So even though TID 4's got a fair amount of debt, we still picture it closing around 2028. TID 5, as we told the JRB today, is kind of our success story of how TIDs can really help us out. It's the Mill Creek Business Park with Prevention Genetics, Hewitt Meats, Top Form, Dental Crafters, the whole industrial park. At the end of 2020, it had about $2.3 million to repay, but it's cash flowing incredibly well. It's got about $900,000 coming in a year, and their debt's about $45,000 a year. So even though it's got a balance of $2.3 million, we expect we can close it in 2023. And that's the one that we would look at using the affordable housing extension. And then Josh, by the end of the year, is going to take a look at bringing forward what that might look like. Where that's a little challenging is because there's not a great model to follow of what the housing extension program could look like. The definitions of affordable housing vary, so he's working on that part. So the other part of this is that TID 5 is one that we didn't borrow enough money for, so they have an advance from the general fund at the end of 2020 of about $2 million. But again, that's paying itself back. That'll be gone by 2023 also, paying back extremely well. So about the amount we expect to be available for the affordable housing option, if we take it, is about $600,000. TID 7 in Yellowstone Industrial, the new PCA building, quality tank, silver coat, Matthew, doing really well. It's generating almost $800,000 in increment. It's got a very small advance left. That advance started out really large, but we used the donors from other TIDs and some of the refinancing to get that down. So we have that one also. Even with putting in the rail spur, all the improvements we've made there, we still show it very positive and closing and possibly in 2028. TID 9 is the Ford Financial Building, a single site. Its increment will exceed its debt, so there's not a lot that'll happen in the future in that. We'll just collect the increment, we'll pay the debt, and that one is pretty quiet. TID 10 is the mall area. And if you remember with these TIDs, it not only includes the parcels, but includes everything within a half-mile radius. So it actually pulls in the increment from McDonald's the BMO, Pizza Hut, Burger King, Simplicity, and those kind of things. So from our side, the city side, it's got a positive cash flow, but, you know, we continue to look at and kind of work with the folks at the mall to see if there's a project that we could do there, because that's what it's set up for, to improve the mall area. I know a couple of years ago, they brought forward a plan, and it's something we just keep looking at with them, that we might be able to help that out. So hopefully, a project will develop there. It's going well, though. TID 11 is Veterans Parkway, Highway 10, out by the new Quick Trip. Relatively new, its increment already exceeds its debt, so it's paying back really well, and there's a lot of room out there for potential new development. So that's TID 11. So recap, TID 12 we're closing. TID 4 is a little longer term, but it's positive. 5 and 7 are growing great and will close early. 9, 10, and 11 are newer, but all of them are individually cash flowing really well. And then today, the GRB approved the creation of TID 12. So we'll look forward to bringing that to the council too. But nope, it is created. Josh is a little better at like the land and the parts of it. But TID 12 was approved. We subtracted some empty parcels from TID 7 and look at that for potential growth. Any questions on any of the TIDs, the reports, anything?
Any questions? Nice job on those graphics, Ron. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is adjourned to closed session under Wisconsin statutes, chapter 1985, sub 1, sub C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, specifically refilling vacant pool technician position in Park and Recreation Department. I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Wetzel, second by Paschal. Roll call, please.
Wagner,
Yes.
Paschal,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yep.
Hendler, Spiros.
Yes.